oddly enough, like Kentucky was kind of first on the release for all that sort of stuff, which rarely ever happens.
Cooper's Craft just came out today.
What the hell is Cooper's Craft?
Cooper's Craft is the first new bourbon in 20 years from Brown-Forman.
Huh. Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's named after the fact that they have their own Cooper.
We have to say many thanks to our supporters on Patreon. The first round of shipments for koozies and stickers have left my door, so you'll be getting those in the mail very soon. Go grab yourself a cold beer and tell all your friends about Bourbon Pursuit this weekend. For all those that pledge $10 or more to receive a sample of bourbon from my bar, I'll be sending out those emails next week with your choices. We're going to have offerings from multiple versions of Willett Family Estate, Four Roses Single Barrel Limited Editions, Old Forester Birthday, Blanton Straight from the Barrel, and Gold, and even more. We can't thank you all enough for supporting the show. As many of you know, this is a hobby for us, and it's your pledges that keep our motivations high. So if you like what you're listening to, please take the time out to help support us. We'll be choosing a winner for June's giveaway, so stay tuned by following us on Twitter and Facebook. Make sure you go to patreon.com, that's patreon.com/Bourbon Pursuit. And welcome back to another episode of Bourbon Pursuit's podcast. Today, we are actually in Indiana Southeast, and it's kind of almost like a little bit foreign to us. Ryan, kind of tell us where we are right now.
Yeah, we're at the campus of IU Southeast. We crossed the bridge. We typically don't do that. We typically stay in Kentucky, where we feel safe and love it. No, I'm just kidding. But
I need a bath when I get home, right?
Exactly. But no, we came here. I'm really excited about today's guest. Her bourbon resume is very lengthy and very interesting. I think the guests will find it interesting as well.
I think so too. So even with that, let's kind of talk about some things that just started hitting, right? So Booker's Rye and Elliott Select, they just started hitting in certain parts of the country, and honestly, I was floored to see this, is that Kentucky was actually first on the list for actually getting a lot of these. It was released at the Jim Beam Urban Stillhouse and even Four Roses Gift Shop within the first day, and then I haven't even seen them pop up around the country yet.
Yeah, that's rare. Usually we've always see it pop up on the message boards, in different states, and you're like, what the heck? But yeah, I guess I've been really excited about this Booker's Rye. I've heard really good things about it. I'm glad you got a bottle, and I'm hoping you'll open yours so I can save $350 or whatever the price tag is.
I got two of them, right?
See, perfect.
Yeah,
so you can you can make that happen.
It's the typical thing, right? You always got to buy one, then you have a backup. But this one is, it's amazing that this came out and it has such a high price tag. From what we know, talking to Fred Noah on the last podcast, was this was the last rye, or the only rye that was done under Booker's watch. It may not be the only one that ever comes out, and there was certainly a very high price tag for it. So right now it's one to open, and then kind of just one to squat on and just kind of figure out what to do with it, the next 5 years, right?
Exactly. I mean, I'm starting to become more of a rye fan, so I really want to try it, and I love everything Booker, so I'm sure it just falls right in there with it. So,
well, you also had some other disappointing news you wanted to share, right?
Yeah, the Michters said that they're not going to bring out the Toasted this year, which is kind of bumming to me. I really enjoy the Michters Toasted. It's a really good value for a limited release. It's usually around $50, $60, but I just thought it was one of their better releases, and it's just, I think this happened too with Four Roses and their limited edition small batch or single barrel.
The single barrel, that's why they didn't have it in 2015.
Right.
They just released Elliott Select for 2016, right?
And it's kind of getting frustrating as a consumer, because you look forward to these limited editions every year, and it seems like they're getting less and less, and I guess the companies are just have so much demand for their staple products. They're probably focusing on that, which I can understand. But as a connoisseur, I guess it's getting disappointing and frustrating that it's getting harder and harder to find these.
I like it that you called yourself a connoisseur.
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, I guess I like to spend money on expensive bourbon. That means connoisseur.
So let's go ahead and let's introduce our guest. So today we have Susan Reigler. This is going to be quite extensive, so just hold on to your seats real quick.
Yeah, it's lengthy.
So Susan is an award-winning writer. She's authored and co-authored several books, such as Kentucky Bourbon Country, The Essential Travel Guide, the Kentucky Bourbon Cocktail Book, the Bourbon Tasting Notebook, and Sweet and Savory, Finding Artisan Food and Beverages in Kentucky. She's a regional judge for the James Beard Foundation Restaurant Awards, a graduate of the Woodford Reserve Distillery's Bourbon Academy, as well as the Filson Bourbon Academy. She's also an executive bourbon steward certified by the Stave and Thief Society and the Kentucky Distillers Association. And lastly, she serves as the president on the board of directors for the Bourbon Women Association. So
basically,
Susan,
we need to hang out with you more.
I'm surprised I can sleep, actually.
Yeah.
When do I have time to do that?
When do you get all this stuff done?
Yeah, that's a really great question. That sounds like I'm really busy.
it makes it sound busy.
Yeah, gracious.
Well, hopefully the people here at IU Southeast don't listen to it, because then they know what you're wasting your time on when you're in your office. Right?
Oh, they're well aware already.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. No
They see
secrets there.
Amazon.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's go ahead and kind of start at the beginning. So what spawned all this love of or affinity of bourbon that you have?
Well, it helped to be born in Louisville, Kentucky. That certainly didn't hurt, as a matter of fact. And I grew up around bourbon. Bourbon was not something that was exotic or new or flashy, or it was just, of course, part of the culture, and was well aware of that. And it just turned out that when I was writing for the Louisville Courier-Journal in the 1990s, this was the time that bourbon started to make its comeback. And I was the restaurant critic, the food and beverage writer, and so my beat was bourbon. I was actually the first reporter to do a feature story on what Brown-Forman initially called their LeBreau and Graham distillery, which they have since redubbed Woodford Reserve. And I just got to start writing about bourbon and re-educating people about it for the time when it was back on the upswing, which was great. It was a great time to...
It was good timing, right?
Very good timing.
That's the way in life it all works. You got luck, good timing, and if those don't work out, you just have to dress nice.
There you go.
That's what I heard. So I guess another question with that is, what else kind of, did you grow up with family that were in the industry, or you just happen to be surrounded by it? I mean, what?
No, well, certainly it's something that you're aware of. My father's hobby, other dads had golf. My dad went to the races. And every Saturday that Churchill Downs was having a meet in the spring and fall, every Saturday of my childhood was spent at the racetrack.
There's no TVG app.
No, not anymore. No, and when I was 5 years old, my dad taught me to play chess and read the racing form.
Perfect.
Yeah, that was the beginning of my liberal arts education. And
we need to bring you to the track also.
Oh yeah, but when I was 3, he took me to Keeneland. That was my first time at the track. But going to Churchill Downs at that time, when you'd walk into the racetrack, it was way before it was prettied up and expanded and all that. It smelled of old wood, cigars, popcorn, and bourbon. That's what Churchill Downs smelled like. And so I was sort of always conscious of that smell. Of course, at age 5, I didn't know what that was, but later on, I certainly knew. And then I actually had the great privilege to be writing about bourbon and just really enjoying digging into the history, the heritage, meeting the people in the industry, which is so terrific, because I have never met a person at a distillery, whether they're the master distiller or somebody working in the rick house storing the barrels, that just don't seem amazingly proud of what they're doing.
Right.
Which is pretty cool, which I think is why a lot of us are so impressed with the bourbon industry, really.
I think that's why a lot of us we're really getting into it, right? And I think that's a good question for you is, how do you categorize yourself, right? Because you look at somebody like Mike Veach and you're like, okay, historian. Mm-hmm. You look at some other people and you think like, oh, authors generalized. Like, how would you categorize yourself?
Well, I mean, generally a bourbon author, but also I do a lot of tastings. I lead a lot of tastings. I do them both for charities and for private events. And I guess the word these days would be bourbon authority.
Oh, there you go.
I know it sounds very highfalutin, but actually as a bourbon steward, that's what that certification program is about too. And so essentially somebody who just knows how to help other people really appreciate bourbon, right, and appreciates its history, its heritage. And I've certainly written about a variety of aspects of bourbon, whether it's how to have a great bourbon experience when you come to Kentucky, or just the background, the fascinating stories, not always entirely true, as we know, of a lot of the brands. And that's terrific.
Let's talk about that real quick, because I think one thing that a lot of our listeners and that we found is that people, when they come in, whether it's a bachelor party or just a 10th anniversary for a wedding, and they come and they want to do the bourbon trail, they end up like binge listening to the podcast and trying to figure out, like, they want to learn as much as they can before they get here.
Right.
So kind of talk about some of those things that you said, like, if you're going to get the most out of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, like what would you put down as
First
like
by our book.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that, so I didn't have to.
Yeah, I didn't want you to have to do the shameless plug.
Oh, thank you. Well, yes, the shameless self-promotion moment, which would be to indeed buy Kentucky Bourbon Country, the Essential Travel Guide, coming in its updated second edition this fall, actually.
Absolutely, there you go.
But other than that, certainly the Louisville Convention and Visitors Bureau has a really nice website that helps you explore bourbon country, as does, of course, the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, which is a trademark copyrighted name. So you don't get all of the distilleries, but you do get the ones that are members of the Kentucky Distillers Association. And obviously, all the distilleries have websites. But going to some of these travel sites that are maintained is a pretty good way to at least get a good introduction and overview, and know that you don't have to travel hours and hours and hours. The nice thing is that you can visit a couple of distilleries in a day, get an idea of the different heritage, the different architecture, the different flavors of the bourbons, different cultures of those bourbons.
All right, I'm going to put you on the spot. You got one day.
Okay.
Which ones are you going to?
Boy.
What's your ideal day?
And I try so hard to remain brand neutral, so of course I can't say all of them, can I? Well, okay, so where's your starting point?
I guess in Louisville. You're downtown Louisville.
You're in downtown Louisville. Well,
I guess
you have
give us the best day on the east side and the best day, south, I guess.
Well, if you're in Louisville and you're in downtown Louisville, you can, of course, do the Evan Williams Bourbon Experience, which is right on Main Street. You can go to the Bullet Frontier Experience at Stitzel-Weller and do a little driving tour, because to get there, you can go down past the Brown-Forman headquarters, see the 68-foot-tall bourbon bottle that's atop the headquarters, the former water tower that's up there, which, by the way, would, if it held any liquid and if it held bourbon, could hold 12,800,000 shots of bourbon.
Oh, wow.
Which would be
That's one hell of a party.
It is. It is. I actually had somebody I told that once who say, well, that's a good start.
Yeah, exactly.
So you could do that, and you could sort of drive past some kind of historic bourbon sites, and you could do a pretty nice Louisville experience. And of course, you have Peerless Distillery, which is one of the new craft distilleries, which is downtown. You can get a lot in Louisville in a day, just if you're staying in downtown Louisville. And of course, check out the Urban Bourbon Trail and go to some great bourbon bars and do a lot of tasting while you're here.
And so, just a reminder, you can get that in her new book coming out in the second edition of the Kentucky Bourbon Country, the Essential Travel Guide.
Your check is in the mail, guys.
There you go.
Exactly.
So make sure you look at that on Amazon.
Link those clicks.
Yeah, we're going to get a $5 credit or something like that right now. So I kind of want to switch gears a little bit, and I want to talk about food, right? Because you're a James Beard judge. You've written books about finding the best food that you can possibly get in Kentucky. So when was the last time you've actually eaten it like a Red Lobster?
I have never in my life eaten at a Red Lobster.
No cheddar biscuits?
No cheddar biscuits. Okay, that's
But I do love White Castles.
There you go.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's got to have their kind of shtick, right?
Absolutely.
So actually, let's get a little bit serious. So let's talk about food and bourbon pairing, right?
Okay.
And I'm going to ask and think, do you think it pairs well together? Because sometimes I find that, for me, if I'm eating, I don't really get to experience the full flavor of the bourbon, because maybe I'm trying to eat like a pepperoni stuffed Hot Pocket, and it just really doesn't, it doesn't really play very well. But do you think that there's a marriage right there that could happen?
Oh, there certainly are.
Probably not with a Hot Pocket.
Probably not. But there certainly are dishes that pair really well with bourbon. I don't think there is any way at all you could mess up a combination of bourbon and bacon in any form. Okay. I think that's one that you can really go for, and that works pretty well. I can think of in fact, you could do something like pasta carbonara, which of course has pancetta, but you can also make it with American bacon, and I think that would be pretty darn good with a glass of bourbon. I think it'd be really nice, and I think the bourbon would. It would, they're just natural partners. The smokiness, the saltiness of the bacon, and you get that nice sweet character. But depending upon your bourbon, you might get a kind of a smoky, leathery, tobacco-y bourbon that could be really nice.
Do you think it takes away from the experience of the full-bodied flavor of a bourbon or something like that?
I don't think so. I mean, if you're not worrying about pairing a wine with a. I mean, sometimes if you pair a wine with a dish, the wine will get wiped out by something you're eating, then that's why you're careful about pairing wines and foods. They're supposed to complement each other and enhance one another. And I've actually had experiences where something, something like a bruschetta with sort of tomato and bacon and just a little spice, and boy, pair that with a really full-bodied bourbon, maybe a cask strength, but of course cut it with a little water to bring out all of its flavors, and they just kind of play off each other. It's like a wonderful culinary tennis match on your tongue. How about that?
Yeah, and so we're getting ready to pull into the 4th of July weekend here. Kind of give us an idea that if you're going to be maybe grilling out, like
barbecuing,
is a barbecue or steak or like Frank's hot dogs or something, like what do you think is a good pairing if you're going to have a bunch of buddies over or a bunch of friends and you're going to be drinking and eating and stuff like that?
So you're talking about a bunch, so this means you're not pulling out your limited edition.
Probably not.
No,
right?
probably not.
Let's say it's 15 of our closest friends.
Okay,
and we only really like 3 of them.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I have a couple of bourbons that I always have as kind of my on hand for a variety of occasions for a lot of people. One that is totally go-to, that makes great cocktails if you want to start out with some cocktails with your munchies beforehand. Old Forester, do a big old pitcher of Manhattans, makes a great Manhattan.
That's Kenny's drink.
Yes, it is.
There
right
you go. It's really, really fine, and you can certainly do that, again, to go with your nibbles, your bites, your stuffed mushrooms, or whatever else that you've got. Then I would say if you're grilling steaks, really fine bourbon to have with a steak is Old Granddad Bottle and Bond.
There you go.
And you know how much that costs? About $17 a bottle,
I was about
right?
to say that's my bang for the buck dollar.
That is definitely a bang for buck bourbon, yeah. And that gets you a very long way. Makes a lot of happy people, and I think it's and it even holds up to something like steak sauce. So, and it also, of course, was Harry Truman's breakfast bourbon.
Oh, really?
You know that story?
No, I don't.
No,
Indulge
share.
us.
Oh my gosh, this is a fabulous story, and you can actually indulge in this at a restaurant in downtown Louisville. So apparently, Harry Truman every morning would have bacon, eggs, slice of toast, glass of milk, coffee, and a shot of Old Granddad, Bottle and Bond. Okay? And then he'd have his massage, and he'd be off to work for the day. Okay?
Sounds like a hell of a start.
It's a great start. And if you go to the Dish on Market Street in Louisville, on their menu, they have the President's Breakfast, and you too can have Harry Truman's breakfast.
What about the massage?
Unfortunately, no massage.
No massage. Gotcha. You
I
gotta
think
go
that's
to
down the
Massage
street.
Envy or something down the street.
Yeah.
Cool. I want to know, since you're a James Beard judge, what are your top 5 restaurants in Louisville?
Now you want to get me in trouble with the restaurants here too.
I'm a big food guy, and I have my top 5. I'm just curious to hear your top 5. If you're were to come in town, where would you send?
Boy, there's so many places.
Yeah, because usually when people ask me all the time, because they're coming in for the Bourbon Trail, and
Right.
not all the time, and it doesn't have to be bourbon related, because if you're doing that for the Bourbon Trail,
Right.
you might get just over bourboned, right? I mean, maybe if there's a thing, but you might get burnt out at some point. And so people are always like, "Where should we go to eat?" And honestly, I'm like, just look at Yelp and TripAdvisor. Those are some of they're usually on point, because you've got a few different places on Bardstown Road, a few other good places. But
Well,
it's good to
and
Jack Fry's is always
always
solid.
good. Certainly on the Urban Bourbon Trail, in one of Louisville's oldest, most distinguished restaurants that's still going and is really great fun, is Lily's Kentucky Bistro.
Yes.
And
Yep.
it's part of the Urban Bourbon Trail.
And
Kathy
she's
Carey's
the James Beard winner, right?
She is, and Kathy Carey's grandfather was a founder of a bourbon brand, Kentucky Tavern. So there's a really good connection.
there's
there.
2.
Yep, that's
Three
okay.
more.
So we've got that. I think ceviche is just so
Ooh,
really
see,
different.
That's my number 1.
Is it?
Ceviche.
I really
that
enjoy
and Jack
ceviche.
Fry's kind of go back and
they're
forth.
they're both fine. If you want to go someplace that's a lot of fun and not expensive, the Crescent Hill Craft House on Frankfort Avenue, great draft beer selection. All the beers are Kentucky or Indiana microbrewery beers, and what a great selection they have. Plus, they have a great selection of bourbon and a really good house old fashioned.
Nice.
And they do locally grown food. They do that as well, and they have some really unusual and good dishes, but for not a lot of money. So that's good. Of course, lots of good Spots Village Anchor out in Anchorage.
Yeah.
Again, they do a really fine old-fashioned and a great menu. So
Yeah, and the ambiance is cool there too. The atmosphere, it's awesome.
yeah, and especially nice weather like now when you can sit outside and enjoy the.
Not when it's 95 and 80% humidity.
No, not a good drinking of bourbon.
That's a
weather.
pretty good 5. I like your 5.
Yeah, okay. Have we gotten up to 5? The problem is I could go on to 50.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
We are blessed. It's crazy, how good of a food.
We didn't even get to Nulu.
Oh,
so,
I know.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I guess another question to follow up with the James Beard being a judge there. First off, let's give our listeners give them an explanation of what James Beard Awards actually are, because not everybody might be familiar with it.
Right. Well, the James Beard Society, what it does is honor top food people around the country, food and beverage people. It's really sort of the Oscars of restaurants and beverage. And of course, James Beard was a very well-known American chef, and this institute was founded, this foundation was founded in his honor, and their headquarters is out of his former house in Greenwich Village in New York. And they invite chefs from all over the country to come and cook their specialties. I think I want to say 5 days a week that they do this, but they give annual awards for chefs of all different stripes. They might be just executive chefs, but also pastry chefs, for food journalism, for beverage professionals. In fact, Julian Van Winkle won a James Beard Award a few years ago for his contributions to the beverage industry as a wine and spirits professional. I think that's the category that he won in. And several other Kentucky bourbon people have been nominated for Beard Awards. So it's a very, very prestigious thing. As I said, it's the Oscars of the food world in America. And
so how did you become a judge of that?
I was invited by another judge, which is how you have to do that, and it was when I was working as the restaurant critic at the Courier-Journal. They look for people who have knowledge of their region and what's happening.
Okay, so you were a food judge.
You got a
then,
master
right?
palate.
Yeah, supposedly.
Yeah.
Supposedly.
So I guess give everybody an idea of what it's like to be a judge going into this, because I could imagine it would be like going to a barbecue competition in like Texas or Kansas where everything is just off the wall.
No, actually, we make nominations based upon places where we have eaten. So it's not like they line all this food up at one time and we have to do anything about it. This is based upon years of experience, which is why they choose people who they think already have a good knowledge of the food scene in a particular region. So, and I pretty much covered the state for the Courier, and I still do quite a bit of food writing online, and I've just started doing some food writing for Leo Weekly in Louisville,
which is
Louisville Eccentric Observer.
It's a local magazine you can get kind of around here in Louisville for anybody that's coming through.
And they're
or
free.
go to leoweekly.com and you can get it online.
There
Absolutely.
you go. Because who gets print anymore, right? So.
That's right.
So let's shift gears back to bourbon. You kind of mentioned earlier like being an executive bourbon steward, but I want you to go a little bit deeper into that and kind of what that entails as having this sort of title.
Mm-hmm. Well, having the title simply means that if somebody wants me to conduct a bourbon tasting, that they should know that I should know what I'm talking about. that's
You're just
that's
not
the
there
purpose.
blowing smoke.
That's
yeah.
right. That's the purpose of the
Like us.
program.
Yeah, you just didn't hire Ryan to come
Yeah.
up there and be like, "Where's all the Dusties?"
That's right.
There you go. And yeah, how do I get those limited edition bourbons?
Yeah.
Some of our favorite questions. So in doing tastings for people, basically is this sort of, it depends on what they want. Do they want bourbon basics? I've had a professional organization call me the other day and say, we really want to do a bourbon tasting at our annual conference. Our newly elected president really likes bourbon, but what does a bourbon tasting entail? And I said, well, it depends on what you want. Do you want a bourbon basics of here's what bourbon is, and we start with the whole business about, it has to be 51% corn, et cetera, something that, of course, all of your listeners know already. Or do you want to explore a particular category of bourbons? Do you want to try all bottled in bond and talk about the history of the Bottled in Bond Act? Do you want to do something really bourbon geeky, or do you want to do something really bourbon basic? And just simply take people through how do you get the most out of tasting a bourbon and the whole process of nosing and tasting and judging the finish and giving people some vocabulary to use to describe what they're tasting. So it just really depends on what somebody wants.
So you do this a lot. And you said you get some of those questions like, how do we get our hands on Pappy or whatever it is,
right?
But what are some of the other questions that are pretty common and some of those answers that maybe you could dispel for some of our listeners?
It's remarkable to me, even in Kentucky, the number of people who do not know that bourbon does not have to be made in Kentucky. That's a really common misperception, nor do they.
Maybe
often.
we have a bias, right?
We have a bias, and we can certainly say that 95% of bourbon's made in Kentucky, so that's
better.
fine.
No.
Yeah. And you guys were had a little trepidation about being in Indiana, but of course there's MGP in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, and they make a lot of bourbon, and they make a lot of good bourbon. So
and the rise too.
Yep, absolutely. So that's always interesting. People think that it has to be made in Kentucky, and say no, but it is a distinctly American product, and so we talk about that. Sometimes, really not even understanding that bourbon is whiskey, and again, the bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskeys are bourbon, right? So those are some of the sorts of things that I go with. And then sort of asking about, the color, the flavor. One of my favorites is, when can you actually call the distillate bourbon? And I get the 2 years, and I say, no, as soon as it touches the wood, it's bourbon. So sometimes I get manufacturing questions, sometimes I get history questions, and sometimes just the very basic. And of course the perennial favorite, why is it called bourbon? And we, of course, anybody on the bourbon tasting circuit have to say, well, we don't really know. We have some ideas, we have many myths, we have many stories, we have some pretty good clues, but we don't really know.
So let's talk quickly about your Kentucky Bourbon Cocktails book, too, because I actually have this. I actually have the first edition of it.
Thank you.
I made the peach-infused, I think it was a Manhattan in there, where you actually had to get peaches, put them into a mason jar, soak them forever, all this other kind of stuff.
Right.
So kind of talk about the book and what it entails.
Okay, well, this was actually... the background on this, I think, is really a lot of fun. Again, I was writing at the Courier-Journal. I had a weekly column called The Drink. It's very poetically named. And I wanted to call it Sippage, but that was far too poetic for the newspaper. And my job was to go around every week and find a really interesting drink to write about for my column. And so sometimes it was a wine, sometimes it was a cocktail, sometimes it was a craft beer. I even once talked about the Italian sparkling mineral water from Whole Foods because it's a really great deal, and I had readers going, "Why are you writing about water?" I said, "Never mind. Okay, I won't do that ever again." I was just trying to provide a little balance here, but that's not what they wanted.
Ran out of drinks to write about.
Well, you really can't. I don't think. And one of the outstanding drinks to me were the very creative bourbon cocktails that Joy Perini at Jack's Lounge in Louisville was making, and as soon as I left the Courier-Journal, and it wouldn't be a conflict of interest, I went to Joy and I said, your bourbon cocktails are so good because you can taste the bourbon in them. That's number one requirement, of course. And boy, you wouldn't believe how many bourbon cocktails you cannot taste the bourbon in. You can taste the bourbon, and they're good. They're not too sweet. They're just really creative. And she's won multiple awards for her cocktails. I said, you really need a book of recipes. And she said, well, I've thought about that, but I really don't write or have time. And I said, you give me your recipes and I'll turn them into a book.
You're like, I do. I'm a teacher. I have plenty of time.
That's it.
You got the whole summer.
The whole summer, yes. Well, students are taking their tests. And actually, she handed me a stack of ruled note paper with all of her recipes written in pencil. And I organized them, wrote stuff about them, turned it into a book, which is why we're co-authors on the book. And that's how we got the Kentucky Bourbon Cocktail book, which is now almost to be in its sixth printing, has sold tens of thousands of copies. And we have Volume 2, more Kentucky Bourbon Cocktails coming out in August. So,
as if you weren't drunk off the first one.
Right.
Yeah, if you were really looking for some more ideas, by golly, we have more ideas, more of Joy's recipes, and also recipes from a lot of guests, some of the distilleries, some of the bars around Louisville in Kentucky, and even as far away as Bowman Brothers in Virginia, because I ran into their master distiller at a
I love
bourbon
Bowman
festival
Brothers.
It's really good
Great
stuff.
So
It is.
what are some of your favorites? Hate to keep asking you that.
Oh
but
my gosh, yeah, you're killing me.
You're the
Wow.
James Beard, judge.
Yeah. Well, I think the one that first caught my attention is the one that's on the cover of the first cocktail book, and that's called the Bourbon Ball. And it's made with Woodford Reserve and Tuaca, which is a sort of vanilla-flavored liqueur. Used to be owned by Brown-Forman. They recently sold that. And a little bit of creme de coco, dark creme de coco. And it tastes like a very alcoholic bourbon
Rattlesnake?
ball. Yeah, it's a bourbon ball.
Bourbon ball,
It's
nice.
certainly appropriately named, and it's delicious. Now it's more of that's with the creme de coco and the Tuaca. It's definitely more of an after dinner bourbon cocktail, but that's certainly, I think, one of Joy's crowning achievements. And then her ginger snap is the cover of the second book, and that one is made with a ginger syrup and some lemon juice and bourbon, and it's really refreshing, really good. It's a great summer cocktail.
Well, we could ask Joy about this, and we actually had Chef Edward Lee on the podcast
Oh, great.
previously.
Yeah, you should talk to Joy, absolutely.
And he said that really once you get over almost 4 to 5 ingredients in a cocktail, past that it just becomes too complex.
Oh, it's crazy.
Yeah, so I mean, what, do you kind of agree with his theory on it that it needs to be super simple?
I totally agree. And in fact, if you look through the book, you'll see that you have very simple ingredients. Think about it. It's like DNA. There are only 4 nitrogenous bases, right? Only 4 different little chemicals.
Way over our head right now.
And that's like the alphabet of all the genes that make you, and there are only 4 of them.
Right.
Okay? So it's like the ultimate information storage system. So why would you need more than 4 or 5 ingredients in your bourbon cocktail, right?
Right.
And I recently judged a bourbon cocktail contest, and it was fascinating because I was all about can I taste the bourbon in this? And look at this. I could actually probably replicate this because, I don't have to do the extract of the endangered herb that they harvested from, the tallest mountain in North Carolina or wherever. It thought, this is just way too elaborate.
Way out there.
Way out there. I thought, keep it simple. And the one that I really, really liked, alas, it didn't win because I was overruled by my other judges, was a Manhattan that was made with beer syrup instead of vermouth. Boy, was it good. And it had, 3 ingredients. It was outstanding.
Wow.
Yeah. But unfortunately, it didn't win.
Yeah, it's okay. So let's.
I tried. Boy, I really, really pushed the case. Yeah.
So let's start wrapping it up because we're reaching the top for this episode. And I kind of want to ask you this because this came from Harlan Wheatley in episode 2. We've talked about it in another one with
Mike Sawney
from Heaven Hill.
Okay.
And the theory was that women have a better palate than men.
Okay.
So kind of talk about that, right? Because even before we started recording, you're like, yeah, there's scientific proof.
Here's the article.
Yes. Well, in science we call it evidence, but yeah, that's quite right. Yeah. If you're doing geometry, you do proofs, but again, that's my science geekiness coming to the fore. Yes, actually, there are excellent scientific evidence having from studies of, unfortunately, of dissecting the brains of dead people. But what it shows us is that women actually have a much larger olfactory bulb, that's the receptor in their brains, to perceive odor, which of course is 95% of our sense of taste. And of course, if it's actually 43% larger, there are 50% more neurons that connect that to the smell receptors in the brain. And essentially, most women, and again, this is an average, most women can taste more complex range of flavors than most men. Now, there are people of both sexes who are super tasters, so-called super tasters, and there's certainly people of both sexes who have really dull palates. But on average, women are better tasters than men, which is why there are women predominantly on the tasting panels at the major distilleries.
Yeah, that's what we found so interesting.
And historically, not just today, but it's been for a very long time.
Well, it's actually good to kind of get the scientific evidence behind it now instead of just saying, yeah, this is just what we do because this is what we heard.
Girls roll, boys drool.
Yeah. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. But Susan, I want to say thank you again for coming on the show today. This was fantastic.
Total pleasure.
We're going to have you coming on again real soon talking about the Bourbon Women's Society. And thank you again for coming on. This was fantastic to learn everything. Go ahead, give everybody a plug for how you can find your books, buy them, and when they're coming out.
Well, if you live in Louisville, I'm sure you can get them at our local bookstores, including Carmichael's and other independent dealers. But you can also, if you're outside of Louisville, they're all on Amazon.com. So just put my name in the search engine, and they'll all pop up.
Okay, and then when are the new editions start rolling out?
The new second volume of the Bourbon Cocktail Book will be out in August, and the updated edition of the Bourbon Country Travel Guide is coming in September.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Well, thank you so much. If you like what you hear, make sure you subscribe to us on iTunes. You can like us on Instagram and Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. Make sure you please, if you like what you hear, support us on the show. Go to patreon.com. That's patreon.com/Bourbon Pursuit.
We got to pay for the guys to come across the bridge to Indiana, so definitely.
I hope you guys drop breadcrumbs so you can find your way back.
That's right.
All right.
Hansel and Gretel it. No, definitely appreciate all the support, and keep the show suggestions, feedback, comment. We love it. So we'll see you next time.
This podcast of Bourbon Pursuit is in partnership with thewhiskeywash.com, a lifestyle website for news and reviews for people who like whiskey, and for those who think a life without whiskey has no style. Thewhiskeywash.com.